Party Coalition. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have a great guest, Joe Connor. Joe, you're new to the Tea Party movement.
That's right.
I met you at our last meeting. You got up and spoke. You have a fantastic story. Our guests our viewers are going to be amazed by what you have to say. But first off, what brought you to the Tea Party?
Well, I think, first of all, I support what the Tea Party has stood for. I see our country as the greatest place on earth, and it's been disturbing over the last several years what has happened, especially since the election of this president. I want to contribute to our country's greatness, to bring it back, and you know, I do have a somewhat interesting story to tell, and I would like to be able to motivate other people to join the political process and support the Constitution, to fight for limited government, and to bring our country to where it needs to be. And you know, this is a great way to do that with the Tea Party movement.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned keeping the Constitution or promoting the Constitution. Right. You know, we've been billed or pegged as religious fundamentalists, and the idea that we have our Old and New Testaments, be it the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. Well, they are in some respects for Americans a sacred pair of documents. And our Constitution seems to be something that those in Washington kind of forgot about, or they're totally ignoring it.
Yeah, I agree. It's you know, it's the rules that we are founded on. It's a contract, and when I hear that it's a living and breathing document that we hear sometimes, it's not. It's a contract. It was signed off on by all the states, and it's the rules by which we govern our nation, and it has to be kept that way, and it has to be enforced.
Now, the Constitution, as a document, in the sense of how it's implemented in a judicial standpoint, comes through the Justice Department. And the head of the Justice Department is Eric Holder.
That's correct.
Now, I understand that you have some sort of, let's say, connection with him in some respects,
yeah,
in that he's had an opportunity to affect your life greatly.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, it goes back a ways now. I mean, just to tell you, my story was when I was 9 years old, back in 1975, I guess I'm dating myself now, but my father was murdered by the FALN, the Puerto Rican terrorist group, at Fraunces Tavern in New York. As you know, as a historian, Fraunces Tavern is where George Washington bid farewell to his troops at the conclusion of the Revolutionary War. My father was a banker. He worked for what's now J.P. Morgan. His name was Frank Connor, and he was 33 years old.
And you were 9.
I was 9. I had turned 9 4 days before. My brother had turned 11 a week before that. So January 24th was going to be a special night for our family. My mom was preparing a meal for us. We were going to be celebrating our birthdays that night. My father went to lunch with clients that day at Fraunces. As I found out later, moved his table to a better table. A bomb was placed behind where he was sitting, and the bomber walked in and had the bomb in a knapsack, put it on a ledge and a stairwell right behind where he was sitting, and within minutes it detonated. It killed 4. It was meant to kill a lot more actually before the detonation. It was kicked by one of the workers who kind of moved it out of the way, one of the waiters at the restaurant, and most of the percussion of the bomb hit my father's table, and 4 of them were killed.
So these individuals who were terrorists trying to get what, independence for Puerto Rico or something like that?
That's their claim.
Is that what their claim was?
That was their claim. They left a communique on Bridge Street across from Fraunces that day, claiming that they wanted independence for Puerto Rico, or killing Yankee imperialist dogs or pigs or something along those lines.
So it was a bomb in a knapsack or something like that.
Yeah, it was a very powerful bomb that was meant to kill, and meant to kill a lot of people.
But fortunately for many other individuals, it was moved away.
Absolutely.
But
we would have had a lot more than 4 people killed.
Right. So the 4 fatalities were the individuals at your father's table?
There were 3 at my father's table, and one who was upstairs at a place called the Anglers Club, which was above Fraunces Tavern.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
60 were injured. So it shows you the kind of power that the bomb had.
Okay, so there was four killed and 60 injured.
The building was blown apart.
Right, I remember the event. That was quite a while ago.
Yeah, it
now,
was 35 years.
Those individuals were caught eventually, and I believe that they were tried and convicted, as I recall.
In 1981, they were arrested. 14 or 11 members of the FALN were arrested in Evansville, Illinois. They had bombs, guns, and they were in the process of robbery, and they were caught in the back of a van actually before the robbery had happened. They were all arrested. They were tried in Chicago, and they were all put away to lengthy sentences, from 50 to 70 to 90 years. At the trial, the judge, McMillan, said he would have sentenced them to death if he could. They showed no remorse. They threatened to kill the judge at the trial. They wouldn't testify. They didn't speak. They believed that they were not subject to U.S. law because they were fighting a war against the United States. They were never specifically convicted of the Francis bombing, but similar to now in the early 80s, it was a difficult economic time, and the economics of law enforcement at the time said these people were put away for 70 years. To bring them back to New York to stand trial only to get put away for another 70 years didn't make a lot of sense. So as my friend Rick Hahn, who has written a book on this, and hopefully it'll be published soon, called Terror's Dawn, points out in his book, law enforcement just didn't have the economics anymore to do that. So those were the 11 put away at that time. After that, Rick had infiltrated the FALN and has videos of them building bombs in the safe houses in Chicago.
Wow.
Eventually, they were arrested too and also put away. So altogether, there were 16 FALN and Los Macheteros, which was a sister group of the FALN, who were put in prison for up to 80 years. In 1999, and now we're getting back to Mr. Holder, then President Clinton offered executive clemency to these 16 terrorists. They didn't accept the clemency, at least not right away. As a matter of fact, they didn't request the clemency. The clemency was requested on their behalf by supporters of the Puerto Rican terrorist movement, which is completely unprecedented. In the world of pardons or clemency, one of the most important things typically is to actually request it, show remorse.
Right.
As my brother had pointed out in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton talked about the power of the pardon, which is a pardon which is a power that that the president has exclusively. He said no one would abuse it lest they be thought conniving, and as Tom said, Hamilton never envisioned Clinton.
Yeah.
So back in '99, Eric Holder, who's now the Attorney General, was the Deputy Attorney General in the Justice Department, and he had been sworn in at that role 2 years before. Almost immediately upon his sworn in, he took the idea of releasing these terrorists as as one of his main goals.
Now, what could possibly lead him to want to do that?
Yeah. It's a great question.
Is there any indication?
About it. Well, I think he agreed with it. I think he agreed with their cause.
He agreed with the terrorists.
Yeah, I do. I mean, there was a couple of things came into play at the time. In '97, Margaret Love, who was the Deputy Attorney General before Holder, had recommended against the clemencies, and Holder fired her almost immediately upon becoming Deputy Attorney General back then. Mm-hmm. And if you remember at that time, Hillary Clinton was on her way to run for senator in New York. And at the time, she was looking to kind of ingratiate herself to a state where she had never lived.
Right.
And
a carpetbagger.
A carpetbagger, yeah.
Yes.
So she had contacted several of the FALN supporters, and through Holder, they had requested clemency. And she took that upon herself, and between the two of them, it was granted. And I believe it was an unholy alliance between the Clintons to help Hillary's political future, and Holder, who I believe agreed with their cause.
It seems kind of odd that Hillary Clinton would seem to feel that she was going to be able to get some sort of political traction or mileage out of pardoning known terrorists.
Well, that was the thing. The Clinton spin on this was not that they were terrorists. As a matter of fact, Bill Clinton said, well, they were never convicted of hurting or any violence. Well, that's not true. They blew up 150 bombs in the U.S., and they were convicted of bombings. They weren't convicted of the specific murders, but they were convicted of bombings, which is violence. And the only reason they weren't convicted of murders was because they just weren't brought back to New York for the trial. It was clear that these guys were they claimed responsibility for it, and in their safe house was the same mimeograph, if you remember those, with the FALN communiques that they had done over the years.
Now, bringing us up to 2010, Eric Holder is now the Attorney General of the United States.
Yeah.
And just recently, at the time of this taping, there was a terrorist trial where one of the terrorists from involved with
Tanzania and
involved with the bombings of the embassies, and he was the chauffeur for Osama bin Laden, was brought from Guantanamo and brought here to be tried in New York City as a
it was a show.
It was a show trial.
Yeah.
But here Eric Holder is involved again with terrorists, and this guy is let off. It seems as though Eric Holder, in some respects, really has a love for terrorists.
He has an affinity. I can't explain why, but it's clear. You know, and there's a special connection for my family too. I mean, on 9/11, I commuted into the city, as I did every day, actually, with my brother on the train, and I was at my office when the planes hit. I worked at 60 Wall Street, and I saw the buildings explode, and we lost my father's godson, Steve Schlag, who lived in Franklin Lakes. He was murdered that day.
Wow.
And going back that night, when Tom and I finally got home, and going back to his family that night and seeing my uncle there, who had to live through my father's death, and now his sons, it left an indelible scar on us. And it really, we warned back in '99, and it was almost 2 years to the day. The FALN terrorists walked out of jail on September 10th, 1999. On September 11th, 2001, 9/11 happened. And back in '99, we had warned against what the release of these FALN terrorists would mean to encouraging future terrorism. And I had warned that in the Senate Judiciary Committee hearings back in '99.
So your family has been affected by two major acts of terrorism here in the United States. I mean, of course, both of these happened in New York City because it primarily is the largest
Literally
target.
within blocks of each other.
And they are literally within blocks of each other. That's correct.
Right.
You know, so your poor uncle, your father's brother. Not
Oh, he's
only
my
lost-
father's first cousin. It was
Okay.
my,
One of these large Irish families. I
yeah, well,
understand.
no, it was funny because my grandmother and her sister both came over from Ireland around the same time to New York City. They both had one child, one son, and they grew up in Washington Heights right near each other. So they were as if they were brothers, but of small Irish families, believe it or not, in that case, yeah.
So, but your family has been impacted by two major points of terrorism.
Absolutely.
Which is absolutely amazing. And then you have the current Attorney General of the United States under Barack Obama's presidency and administration having a connection to both of these events in some respects.
Yes.
And here you are to talk about what it's all about with your family. You, of course, I'm sure, have had an opportunity to approach Eric Holder.
Well, I testified against Eric Holder at his confirmation
Okay,
hearings.
well, we're going to be going to a
2009.
break in just a second. I don't want you to give that away because we want our viewers to come back to hear that story of how you had an opportunity to really speak out about a man who basically let the guys that murdered your father get off scot-free.
That's correct.
With all the excitement happening with the Tea Party, it may be a little hard to separate fact from fiction. Find out the truth for yourself. Visit the New Jersey Tea Party Coalition's website at www.njteapartycoalition.org. You may find a common voice to your concerns on how our government is functioning and discover a means to help restore our nation based on the proven principles of our Constitution.
Welcome back to Tea Time with the New Jersey Tea Party Coalition. My guest today is Joe Connor. Joe, we were talking about the FALN terrorists that were pardoned by Bill Clinton, how these individuals wreaked havoc on your family by killing your father as terrorists, and that Bill Clinton, at pretty much the request of Eric Holder, who is now Attorney General of the United States, they were given clemency. Now, you had an opportunity to go down to Washington, D.C. when Eric Holder in the Obama administration was going from Deputy Attorney General to rise to become the Attorney General of the United States, the man who would be responsible for enforcing our laws, the chief law enforcement officer of the United States.
Yeah.
And he certainly has what seems to be an affinity towards terrorism. So what happened when you went to Washington?
Well, January of 2009, I was asked by the Republicans, and at the time was our inspector, to come down and testify against Eric Holder at his confirmation hearings. I sat on the first day in the room in the Senate building and listened to Holder's testimony and was absolutely astounded by some of the things he said. I had a prepared testimony that I had to rewrite that night because Holder it's amazing some of the things that he came up with. And some of the issues that were raised that day were Holder claimed that he didn't know or hadn't seen the video of the terrorists building bombs. He portrayed the clemency as reasonable for people who never requested clemency, blew up 150 bombs in the U.S., threatened to kill the judge, were taped building more bombs, were arrested with machine guns and other weaponry, and he considered their release reasonable. He also
reasonable on what grounds?
Well, he never explains what he considers reasonable, which is pretty much a problem when you're talking about the Attorney General.
So here we have in the United States a group of individuals who were not Islamic terrorists, but they were terrorists nevertheless.
Right.
And this is way before 9/11.
Yeah.
They're out there building bombs at their trial when they're finally caught. They're building bombs, they're blowing up bombs, and they're killing people in New York City.
Absolutely.
And then when they are arrested and they're on trial, they're threatening to kill the judge.
Yes.
And they're all convicted for all of these terrorist acts, except they weren't brought to New York City because they were already charged, convicted with their terrorism acts outside of Manhattan.
Right. And
so they were already serving time.
They were going to be put away basically for the rest of their lives.
Okay, so they're in jail
Right.
for these acts of terrorism, and the current Attorney General of the United States is testifying to the Senate that he felt that this was reasonable.
Yeah, and it's worse than that. They never requested clemency. They were never asked to give information about unsolved bombs. They were allowed to speak between each other on conference calls within the prisons before they accepted clemency, because if you remember, they were given clemency and it took them 30 days to accept it. As a matter of fact, 2 of them didn't accept the clemency and chose to stay in prison.
Really? So there's 2 of them still in prison?
Oscar Lopez is in prison, and one of the FALN actually was quietly paroled this year, a guy by the name of Torres, and I've been trying to find out under what circumstances his parole was issued. I've looked to Judicial Watch and Scott Garrett's office to get a Freedom of Information Act, and the Justice Department and the Bureau of Prisons has been very quiet on that.
But the 2 guys that stayed and refused the clemency from Bill Clinton were pretty much basally becoming self-imposed martyrs
for the cause.
For the cause.
Yes. These people believed in what they did. They had connections to Cuba. They were part of an amalgam of 1960s and 70s radicals that included the Weather Underground, which Bill Ayers was a member, and Bernadine Dorn, his
Okay, now,
wife.
some people in our audience may not be familiar with Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn.
Yeah.
Connect them to our current president and the administration with Eric Holder and all.
Yeah.
Bill Ayers.
Bill Ayers is a hero of academia at this point. He's a Chicago resident and a friend of Barack Obama. As a matter of fact, there were reports, and I think Obama has denied it, but there were reports that Obama started his political career in the living room of Bernadine Dorn and Bill Ayers. In 1969, Bernadine Dorn went to Cuba, met with North Vietnamese delegates and Cuban intelligence, it was her group was connected to the FALN. When they were arrested, there were sting operations against some of these groups, and they were connected to each other. Some of them from various groups showed up with each other, and they were directed by the Cuban intelligence. And this is all going to be, it's public knowledge, but it's going to be put together in this book called Terrorist Dawn, which hopefully will be released soon. Rick Hahn is the author.
So we have an Attorney General in the United States who's the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, who's supposed to be upholding the Constitution, and a president who, for all intents and purposes, swore to uphold the Constitution. Right. His word is worthless, in my opinion. In cahoots with a whole group of people who have connections to North Vietnamese communists, Cuban communists, the Weather Underground, the Weathermen blowing. Didn't Bill Ayers actually blow up bombs in Washington, D.C., as I recall?
The Weather Underground did. I don't know that Bill Ayers, from what I understand about Bill Ayers, he was conveniently not present when a lot of these things happened, but it was his group that did it. I think Bill Ayers really in the world of terrorists would be considered a coward, which is saying something. But yeah, we have a, as I've written I blog at times for Red State and for BigPeace.com, and you know, as I've written in an open letter to my father all these years later, you know, the terrorists couldn't beat us by blowing things up and killing my dad, but they have beaten us to an extent politically, in the ballot box, by deceit, and it's tragic. My father wouldn't recognize the United States of 2010, but we're getting better. And
we are getting better.
You know, I love what has happened this year, and I think that it's just a matter of time before you know, Holder is exposed for what he is, and because I think he's an ideologue, and I think he's a stooge. I think he's a stooge to his boss, and I think he's an ideologue to left-wing causes, and you know, it's abominable that the chief law enforcement officer of this country has catered to terrorists over and over again. As a matter of fact, when the FALN was released, he had several meetings with FALN supporters and never contacted the victims or their families at all. As a matter of fact, we read about the clemencies in the newspaper.
Any idea of what those meetings were about? What were they?
There was
comparing notes on how to be better terrorists within the government themselves.
It was a political coming together. You had Jose Serrano, you had Luis Gutierrez from Chicago, Nita Vasquez, various people in our Congress meeting with Holder, pushing this agenda. And then you had Hillary Clinton connecting her goal of Senate, and you know, you had an unholy alliance, and voila, they released these guys.
You know, as we're speaking, all of us in our area were so impacted by 9/11, and there are so many people who are the relatives and friends and families of who are victims of terrorism. Yeah. Not so much just their loved ones that were killed on 9/11, but all the families that lost all those mothers, fathers, friends, brothers, sisters, are victims of terrorism. And here you are from back in the 70s.
Another generation.
Another generation almost, a family who are here to speak out and point and say that the terrorism is being condoned in our own nation. And now Eric Holder is out there basically trying to release the terrorists for those that were involved in 9/11.
Yeah, he's trying to clean out Gitmo and release the terrorists. And, you know, there's a lesson here. You know, I've been involved in a support group in Glen Rock, that 9/11 support group, and just fantastic people. And I originally went because I wanted to try to help them know that there's life after terrorists.
Yeah.
And, you know, our family succeeded. These terrorists, or Holder or Clinton or Obama, they can't destroy the Connor family, right? We stuck together. And, you know, my brother and I graduated college. My mom and my brother graduated college the same day. She went back to college after my father was killed and got her degree the same day my brother did. We stuck together, and we're evidence that the American spirit, it will overcome this. And I wanted to kind of, you know, talk to the 9/11 victims about that. And the more I went there, the more I realized I'm one of them. And you know, have such an affinity with such a great, strong group of people. And you know, we have to keep up our fight, and we have to know that we have the best country in the world, and these guys can't beat us.
Right. We do have the best country in the world. They can't beat us because now America's waking up.
Yeah.
It's not just like your family alone with the 4 individuals that were killed at Francis Tavern, or with the 9/11 victims' families, who are very numerous.
Yeah.
But we all in America are victims of individuals like Eric Holder and the Barack Obama administration, those who would have total disregard for our Constitution. And we are now waking up to the fact that our Constitution as a document, as you said in our beginning here, was that it's a contract between we the people,
And our
the government.
Yep.
And
our God.
And our God, absolutely, yes, who gives us all our rights right off the bat.
Absolutely.
So we are not going to stand for these individuals who are going to try to take away not only just our rights, but in the case, our families and our lives and liberties.
Yeah, we don't have to stand for them. You know what I mean? We can overcome them. I mean, when I sat there and testified against Holder, I had Senator Leahy and some of the other senators looking down on me, and I felt I felt that they had contempt, or I don't know. It was such an odd feeling, the way, and you know, there's nothing contemptible about me. There's nothing sympathetic about me. We overcame. I've probably overcome more things than those guys have sitting up there on Capitol Hill, and they're no better than the rest of us.
Real Americans.
Yep.
Folks, have an opportunity, get online, go to the New Jersey Tea Party Coalition.org website, visit us. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.